We are at the 3 games that I've played since the last video. And I actually played 5 games, so 2 of these got played twice. The first was Caylus 1303. And Caylus 1303 is a kind of redesign, re-edition from Caylus. And I've talked about this one in past videos, and I mentioned how every time I play the game, I haven't played it for about 6 months to a year, and so I'm a little fuzzy on it. And I played Caylus 1303 a few weeks ago with a couple of friends. I got completely shellacked, and then we played again last weekend, and it was fresh in my mind. The rules were fresher in my mind. So I actually was able to win this time. And I think I've only won Caylus once before, and that was the very first time I played it. It was the very first edition, and I played it like a 6-player game, and I think I benefited by a bunch of other people doing things that really negatively affected everybody else. So I kind of just walked between the raindrops and was able to win the game. But since then, I have not performed very well in my plays of Caylus or Caylus 1303, because this is a game where you are sort of committing to actions, and then you don't take those actions until the end of the round. So sometimes you're getting resources that you'll need to use for a future action in the same round. And if you don't plan that correctly, you could get to a point in your actions where you don't have what you need to take them. And that happened to me a couple times. There's also a very unique mechanism in Caylus 1303, well, any Caylus game. And that is, Caylus is a worker placement game, but there is a unit. It's a kind of wooden guy on a wooden horse, meeple. I forget what he's called, but he's thematically, you're building up this town leading up to a castle. That's what you're doing. And there are some actions you can take for kind of set collection rewards, which you do sort of at the castle. But the rest of what you're doing in this game is you're building buildings, and you're going to buildings to get resources to build other buildings, and you're kind of activating these tiles. But there is this meeple guy, I forget his name, and he's on a horse, and he kind of walks around this road. And at the end of a round, players are able to move him. And so you can move him backwards if you want. You can also move him forwards if you want. There's also an action space where you get to move him in addition to the movements you would normally get at the end of the round. And then there are some player powers that let you move him as well. So with all the moving of this horse meeple guy, if you move him back, then the buildings that are in front of him on the path, kind of between him and the castle, those buildings will not trigger. So this is a very kind of push your luck, take that game within the worker placement genre. And if you don't plan things properly, or you don't anticipate, whether your opponents are going to want the use of buildings or want to deny other people the use of buildings, you could really, you could take it on the noggin in terms of getting, actions that you planned taken away from you if that meeple kind of gets moved back far enough. I do like the game, Caylus. I like it a lot. I play it probably any time that I was asked. There are so many worker placement games out there, and so many good ones. As to whether or not I would ever add the game to my collection, I think the answer is probably not. Just because I already have quite a few really good worker placement games, and they kind of run the gamut from light to heavy. Like I've got a really good representation. So while I enjoy Caylus, I feel like I've gotten enough opportunities to play it, and I think I will continue to have opportunities to play it. So I don't think I need to add it to my collection, but it is a really good game. And if anyone is thinking of purchasing it, I'd give you the thumbs up. It's a solid game, and it looks good. The components are good, and it's a tight design. It's definitely a solid game. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I acquired the Chronicles of Crime Millennium series, and I've played the first game, 1400, and I've played the tutorial, and then I've played the first of 4 scenarios. So one thing that anyone should know about these games, these kind of investigative games, is that you are solving a mystery. You're trying to solve a mystery. and that is not randomized, from session to session. Like there's a very specific case, there's a very specific solution, there are everything is kind of set. It's the same from game to game. So the Chronicles of Crime Millennium series came with basically 4 different games within it. There's 1400, 1900, 2400, and then there is a 4th game that travels through time. I think you need all 3 of the other games to play this one, because I believe that 4th one uses components and assets from all of the other 3 games combined. But each of these, smaller box experiences has 4 cases. And then you throw all them together and you've got the Millennium Edition, which is comprised of 16 cases for each of 4 cases. So once you play these cases, like once I play Millennium, the 1400 game, and I play each of the 4 cases, I'm done. I can't continue to play it because I know all the answers. And there are a lot of games like this. There's Detective of Modern Crime board game, there's Deadline, there's Detective City of Angels, there's the Time Stories games, there are the Exit the Game series and the Unlock series. And I don't necessarily have a problem with these types of games. I mean, some people might, and I certainly would not criticize them for that, because you are paying the same amount of money that you'd pay for another game, but you have a very limited experience. So the question then becomes, is it worth it? And for me, the answer is yes. The first game in the series, 1400, the one that I've played, I mentioned I played the tutorial, which was a very good way to kind of just get you familiar to the technology. This is a game where most of the gameplay is scanning QR codes. So you're going to be going around to locations, and you're going to be interviewing people at locations and picking up and examining objects, and then asking people about objects and other people. The one thing you can't do is ask people about locations. But every time you do those things, you are scanning QR codes. And so there's an app, and it's connected to an app. Again, that's something some people may not like. But the art is beautiful, from the kind of location boards to the card art, and the design is elegant, I would say. It's not complex in terms of there being a lot of things happening, but it's very simple and elegant, and it works. I think, as I was describing, when you play the game, you've got this kind of main board that has items that you found, and then items that you know about but you haven't found. They kind of go in 2 different areas. And also you may fit in there people where you know of some people but you don't know where they are. And then as you're playing the game, you're going to draw location boards out, and you'll put it all over the table. And when you go to locations, you may find certain characters there. So you'll put the characters on the location boards. So by the time you're done with a case, you've got this really interesting, kind of swath of all these location boards with all these people, and it looks kind of like, what you might see at a police station on a TV show anyway, when they're, trying to solve a crime, and they've got like the people's pictures up, and they've got string connecting everything because they're crazy smart police detectives and they're savants, and they've got everything on a wall. Like, your table will kind of look like that, and it looks thematic, and it's got gorgeous art on the location boards and the cards. Everything looks very pretty. And in terms of any of these games where you're trying to solve a case with specific information, it's very well done. Now, like I said, I know there are a few other games out there. I have yet to play Detective, a Modern Crime game, or Detective, a Modern Crime board game. I have yet to play Detective City of Angels, which is a little different because it can be played with a character kind of acting as a dungeon master or a GM, and that player can kind of screw with the players who are trying to solve the case, and it's a semi-cooperative game. They're sort of competing against each other to solve it. So I have not played that one, and I haven't played the original Chronicles of Crime. I have played Time Stories. I like Time Stories a lot. And then I've also played this game called Deadline, which is also a game that comes with 12 cases. Each one has very specific information, and when you solve a case, that's it, you're done. And Deadline, so far for me, is probably the weakest of all the games that I've mentioned that I've played, because I find the writing of it kind of obtuse. It's not very clear. If I'm being obtuse, what I'm trying to say is it's not very clear. And the thing is, in a game like that, if you're trying to solve a crime, you need all the information to be there, to be on the components and the materials. And the thing that I found with Deadline, which is problematic, is even once you have all of the information, sometimes you really still can't puzzle things out. And it's not because you have a problem, it's because the writing in the game just isn't strong enough and they haven't given you all of the information. And sometimes I think they want you to make leaps of logic that are not supported by the information in the game. That is not the case in Chronicles of Crime. Everything that I've seen so far, at least in 1400, is that everything is very clear. So you may not find things you need to find, but that's on you. Once you do find those things, it should be easy to sort of apply them to the solution of the case. So it's straightforward, it's clear. I've only played the tutorial and the first scenario, which is easy. I know the second one, I think the second two are medium, and the third one is difficult. So I don't know if my experience will change as I play the cases that are of a higher difficulty, but I'm just hoping that those cases are complex and kind of more involved and more complicated, but still clear and well written. And I think that was the problem that Deadline got into, which is that kind of the more that you get into it, their way of making it more complex is just to not give you all the information and kind of have it not spelled out for you on the cards. And I don't mind things being vague, but if you don't have the information, you can't solve the case. And I think Deadline errs too far on just not even supplying the information and hoping you're going to make random large jumps of logic, whereas Chronicles of Crime is very clear about what it's doing. And as I said, the replayability on it is very, very limited, but the experience of it is very rich and elegant, and it's a beautiful, gorgeous game. And the way it's designed and the way the art kind of works together, it very much draws you in to having this sort of lush thematic experience. So far, based on my limited experience with 1400, I would recommend the series. Probably the base game too. I think it's unlikely that the base game is that much different. I think the strengths of this series probably applies to the original base game as well. Although I know that there are a few kind of mechanical additions to the series that I don't think are in the base game, but they're just little things, I think, to make things more fun. For instance, your character has a dog that follows you around, so you always have this dog card. And then if you ever want to have your dog smell something, like if you found a garment or something, and remember, this is in 1400, so there's no DNA. But if you want your dog to smell something and hopefully getting a scent or using the dog to identify someone, you scan the dog, and then once you're in a conversation with the dog, you can scan the item and the dog will smell it. And he'll either run to the location where that person is, and the person that he smelled on the item, or if you're in the right location, he may just go up to that person and identify them. So that's just a very little thing. And I don't think that is in the original Chronicles of Crime base game. It doesn't change anything that much, but it's a very fun little involving thing. You can also go back home to where you live, and you have 3 brothers and sisters there, one who's a spy for the king, and the spy will give you information about people, around town, especially if they're, working for the king or they're kind of criminals. Your brother, the spy, should have information. You have a sister who kind of knows a lot about antiques and items and things. So if you have any questions about objects, you can sometimes go to her for help. And then you have another brother who's like a monk. And so if you have any questions about things that are kind of the church, And in this time period, there's a lot of stuff that's, crosses and religious texts and, religious people. So he's a good place for information on that. So that's just one thing that I think is baked into 1400 that's not in the other games. But I imagine there are other similar things in like 1900 and 2400. And then, of course, the fourth expansion has you traveling through time, which I think should be kind of neat. I think you're going to be like, maybe you do something in one time, and then later on, maybe you can leave something behind, and then in a later period of time, go like dig that item up or something. I haven't played it. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be, interrelations between the three time periods in that expansion, which seems like a lot of fun. So in general, as I said, the art and the design work for these games is just top notch, which it needs to be, because the whole experience is that kind of puzzle solving. And in that sense, it's not really a board game. It's really just kind of a puzzle that you're solving cooperatively if you want to play with other people. And again, for a game like this, you just want to make sure that you're playing with people who communicate and cooperate well together, and then you will have a good experience. So definitely recommend it. And then the last game is Legends of Andor. And I bought the base game for this a while ago. I also bought one of the small expansions, which gives you extra characters. Legends of Andor is essentially sort of a dungeon crawler, but a very, very light base level dungeon crawler. And it's designed and has the art done by Michael Menzel. Michael Menzel is a very famous, well-known fantasy board game artist who I'm sure you've played games that he's done. I think he's done Stone Age, but he's done a ton of stuff. But Legends of Andor was him throwing his hat into the design ring, and I think designing a game that he could maybe play with his kids. So it is lighter. It's very fiddly. There's kind of a lot going on with components. There's a deck of cards that each game will kind of give you the instructions as you're playing the game, and certain events will happen, and it'll kind of reveal things. And it's meant to make the game play very smoothly and very easily. The downside of that, though, is there's not really a very good rule book with the rules written out, because it's very kind of reliant on the rules being taught for each game through this deck of cards. And so, like, on the one hand, it kind of does facilitate things, but on the other hand, it's hard to go back and find like a definitive rule if there's something you're trying to look up. There's also kind of like a lot of pieces and a lot of things happening on the board, so it's very fiddly, but it's not complex. There's not like a lot of Euro mechanics or anything like that. It's not super combat heavy. In fact, usually what you're doing, you're trying to maximize your actions, really, the efficiency of your actions. And a lot of what you're doing is going around the board and kind of doing some pick up, deliver stuff. You're doing some combat. You're trying to discover some things. But there's usually a soft timer within Legends of Andor where if you kill too many enemies, it accelerates the game and you will lose. So as you're playing the game, you're trying to balance killing enough enemies to make the game, easier for you to get them off the board and allow you to do what you need to do. But you mostly cannot just go through and kill everything like you would in a lot of dungeon crawlers. It's kind of a puzzle. It's not a hard puzzle, but it's a puzzle. And so I've played the first scenario several times. I think, I played it first when I got it, and then I had a friend who had owned the game, couldn't find anyone to play with, so he got rid of it. And so I said, well, why don't you come over and we'll play it? So we played with him, and we replayed that first scenario. I think we may have played that first scenario one other time. And it's got kind of like a little mini tutorial, and then it sort of goes beyond into the first scenario. And in that one, because there's 5 scenarios in the base game, and each one is a little different, has different goals. So in the first scenario, you are protecting the castle from kind of like an onslaught of enemies. And then eventually you are trying to run a letter across the board, kind of a pick up and deliver thing. And so I played that a few times, and once you know how to beat it, it's not very hard. And so we finally moved on. We played this second scenario. And in the second scenario, again, you're trying to stop an onslaught of enemies from getting into the castle, and there's some harder enemies. And then you're also looking through these fog tokens that you can uncover when you step on a space where there's a fog token. The thing is, you also automatically activate it. And sometimes that can be bad because the fog tokens can sometimes give you perks, and they can sometimes give you, they can trigger bad things, like more enemies coming on the board, or, just events that are bad for your players. So there's an item called a looking glass. And if you have this looking glass, spyglass, you can uncover all the tokens that are adjacent to where you are. So that's a really good way of, you get in there and you can reveal all these fog tokens, and then you know where the ones are that are good and which ones to avoid. And one of these fog tokens is going to have a witch character in this second scenario. So you need to find the witch. Once you've found the witch, she will tell you where a certain herb is. You need to go get the herb. Then you need to take it back to the castle to heal the king. And then while this is happening, there's going to be this tower revealed with a scrawl on it, which is one of the monsters of the game. He's kind of like a dragonborn lizardy guy. And because he's up on this tower, he has a very, very high... I'm trying to think what I would... to hit, basically. Like, to hit him, you need to have a very high roll. He doesn't have a lot of hit points, but in order to hit him, you're going to need to have a very high combined roll. It's called strength, I think. And so you need to know about this as you're playing through this second scenario, so that you're bulking up your party and getting equipment for them and weapons, or bulking up their strength, so then when you get to this kind of situation at the end of this scenario, this tower, you can kill this guy. And it's going to be like, you're either going to be able to kill him or you're not. And if you haven't bulked up your team enough and you're not, the game's just going to end there. So we played it twice, actually. The first time we failed. Second time we knew what we had to do, and we achieved victory. And there are now 3 scenarios left in the base game that we have not played. I think with Legends of Andor, although it's very charming and it's very thematic, they really kind of make... Well, Michael Menzel, right, is an amazing artist. So the board, it looks great. One of the best boards I've seen. It's Michael Menzel. And there aren't miniatures in this game. They use standees, and that's fine. It works really well for this game. You don't need miniatures. And the standees, again, are by Michael Menzel, and they look great. But there is all this kind of fiddly stuff that you're putting out there. There's a double-sided board, so when you get to one of the scenarios, I think it's the 4th, you actually play on back side of the board, which is like a cavern area. So it's pretty, it's very thematic. It kind of sucks you into its world, but it's not very difficult. And I think once you have succeeded at each of these scenarios and you understand what they are and how they work, I don't think that there's going to be much reason to ever really want to replay them. Now, there's 2 different character packs, and I have one of them, which will allow you to play with different characters. So that's trying to give you a little more replayability. And then there are 2 sequel games. So you could, kind of assemble this whole thing. I think each one has like 5 scenarios. You'd have 15 scenarios. And if you're looking for this whole thematic experience, I think especially maybe if you have kids and you're playing with maybe younger children and you're trying to introduce them to dungeon crawlers and kind of cooperative gaming, this is a great place to start. It's a great experience. But just know that at a certain point, I think once you've gone through all these scenarios and you know what they are and you know how to beat them, the replayability factor is going to be very low, even throwing in other characters. And the way the characters work is they kind of all roll dice, and you can only use 1 dice roll for any one character, but like your fighter has a lot of dice, so you'll roll all the dice at once and just take the highest roll. You have an archer who has a bunch of dice, but you roll them 1 at a time. So with him, it's kind of a push your luck thing, because you might roll a 4 and then you think, ooh, can I beat it? But if you roll your next dice and you get a 1, the 4 has gone away and your roll is now a 1. So you're sticking with whatever your most recent roll is. And if you have, let's say 4 dice, if the 1 is bad, maybe you have another die and you can roll again. but you're trying to kind of hit a high roll and lock that in and not, not be stuck with a low roll. But there is some push your luck involved with that for that character. There is a wizard character who only ever gets one die, but he has a special ability where he can flip it to the other side, which means if you roll 1, 2, or 3, you're just going to flip that die over to the other side, so a 1 becomes a 6. So therefore the wizard is always rolling a 4, 5, or 6, although he can also flip over, instead of his own dice on a, in a turn, he can flip over one of his allies' dice. So if he rolls a good roll, like a 5 or a 6, he could use his ability to flip another character's dice. So all the characters function a little bit differently. Like there is variable player abilities in this, and a lot of it has to do with the dice rolling. I think the characters usually either get they also get one other kind of ability as well, like the wizard being able to flip the dice over. So there is some variable player power, and you can switch in and out characters. It will give you a little bit more replayability, but the scenarios are going to remain the same. And once you know how to beat them, you probably can beat them with any combination of characters. So again, it's not a high replayability, and if you like dungeon crawlers, I probably would recommend a different one out there, unless you just really want this very beautiful, very thematic Michael Menzel illustrated experience, and especially if you're kind of dealing with more casual gamers or maybe young kids. This could be a very kind of cool experience. But just know that it very much is an experience, and you're going to go through it, you're going to finish it. You're probably not going to be playing this game over and over and over with the same scenarios. But for what it is, it was enjoyable. I'm looking forward to playing the remaining 3 scenarios in the base box. If my fiance Kristen asks for me to pick up, the sequel games, I probably will. I don't know if she'll want me to do that. She's very much enjoying the game, but I think she also sees that, it's got its limits. And so I think we'll probably be content with doing the 5 scenarios in the first game, and then just moving on to other dungeon crawlers, of which we have many. So that finishes up the played game section for this period, and thank you for being here with me, and I will see you again with some 7th Continent videos, and then we'll be back in 2 weeks for another slate of monthly roundup stuff, because the monthly roundup stuff is happening twice a month. And I will be back in late December with another update. And I will see you then.